All right, everybody, we have reached the halfway point of class. We are beginning Unit 3 of the 4 units we're going to be learning about in here, and Unit 3 has to do with the time frame of 1750 to 1900. I thought I'd jazz it up a little bit and use some really hokey stock photos and cliches, just because I find them funny. But anyway, if you are absent, the question I started out class with was this question. 1750 to 1900, what comes to mind? What happened during those 150 years? See? Hokey stock photos. And that's a big, broad question. I get that. Now, to simplify matters for you, if you look at 1750 to 1900, you can really put it into 4 big themes. And these themes, there's no particular order to them. We're going to start with political revolutions. But nationalism, industrial revolution, and imperialism would round out the 4 big themes that summarize 1750 to 1900. Okay? So anyhow. So political revolutions. There are 5 commonalities to why people have political revolution. Number 1, you have to have some reasons to revolt. Number 2, leadership to solidify the movement. Number 3, a methodology, or plural methodologies, to enact change. You're going to get a response from the power structure, but those responses vary when you look at different historical situations. And number 5, an outcome that produced a different world than the pre-revolution. Notice I didn't say better, because it could be better, it could be worse. We're going to be looking at several of these political revolutions, but all of the revolutions I teach you about, these 5 areas apply to those revolutions. So anyhow, to go into a little more detail, reason to revolt. Now here's my hokey cliche. If it's not broke, don't fix it. However, it does apply for a revolution, because happy people don't revolt. Happy people don't want to change the things that are making them happy. That's logic. Angry people revolt. Oppressed people revolt. Unified people revolt. Because I'll tell you what, if you are revolting and you're alone, that's a tough position to be in. It's a lot easier when you have your people behind you. And when you ask yourself reasons to revolt, it is fairly simple in the respect that human beings have been mistreated throughout history. And all forms of mistreatment, if they go to a certain point, will give people the reasons to revolt. All right. Now, number 2, leadership to solidify a movement. And if I were to pose the question to you, think of some great leaders, either presently or in history. And what traits did, okay, if it's past, or do, if it's present, do they possess? It's interesting. I've asked this question to hundreds of students throughout the years, and I get the same adjectives of things that describe a great leader, but oftentimes it's to solidify people, it's to galvanize people, it's to unify people. Now, it certainly helps when there's a good cause to get behind, but I think we all can understand this point. An organization is only as good as their leadership, and here's my cliche, their strength in numbers. Absolutely, but you got to get that person or group of people to get those numbers together. All right, so number 3, the methodology or methodologies of change. So when you're enacting change, they really fit into 2 broad areas: violence, nonviolence. Some revolutions are violent, others are nonviolent. And people use different methodologies to change. And even on a simpler level, if you're trying to enact some change, sometimes, being nice is the way to go about it. Sometimes being assertive. Sometimes you have to be super assertive. So every situation requires some strategy to how do you enact that change. Oh yeah, my cliche. There's a time and a place for everything. There is a time and a place for diplomacy. There's a time and a place for being militant. There's a time and a place, you get it, okay? So that's big point number 3. Now, big point number 4, when you look at political revolutions, the powers that be will respond to your revolt. Now, whether the powers that be commit fully or partially, so for example, they might say, this revolution's not that big of a deal to me. I'm only going to allocate this amount of resources to it. Some revolutions, the powers that be give full commitment to stop the revolution. Now, is the response diplomatic? Is it military? A little bit of a different thing. Now, what allies are involved with both sides? Similar to the last point, there's strength in numbers. Now, the people who are in revolt, do they have some allies that will help them? The people who are trying to stop the revolt, do they have allies to be on their side? So the moral of the story is, when you commit to a revolution, the obstacle is something you need to prepare for. Now, in this case, this is a combination of cliche and stock photos. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Not in this case. In the realm of science, yes, but in the realm of revolution, not necessarily, because the action of revolution might be fairly minor compared to a very severe reaction from the powers that be. Or the revolt might be really severe and the powers that be, don't, meet it with the same level of motivation, if you get that. Okay, now big point number 5, an outcome that produces a different world. Okay, now here's a show from my childhood, the 80s and 90s, A Different World. See, told you it's hokey. This show has nothing to do with political revolution, by the way. So anyway, the outcome. Was there total victory for the revolution? Some stories, the people in revolt were completely victorious. Sometimes it's a partial victory where the power structure remains in charge, but they make some changes that cause the revolution. Sometimes it's a total debacle and made the people in revolt situation worse. That's a risk that you run. But with every political revolution, there's a different outcome, okay, that comes from the revolution. These changes are geopolitical. In other words, where does a nation fit into the world? Do they diminish themselves? Do they rise up? Does it change the culture? Economics. Does it put more money in the people's pockets, less money in the people's pockets? Do they change their government? Does it go from a monarchy to a democracy, and that kind of thing? So, to review, political revolutions have 5 commonalities. People have to have reasons to revolt. You need to have leadership to solidify the movement. You have to have methods and strategies to enact the change. You're going to get responses from the power structure. And number 5, a different outcome will be produced post-revolution than the world of a pre-revolution world. Okay, so that's the overview, just to give you a little flavor of 1750 to 1900. Now, the next steps in our journey, tomorrow I'm going to teach you about the Haitian Revolution, and I'm going to do the heavy lifting. I'm going to take these 5 items that I briefly lectured about and run them through the Haitian Revolution as a case study. Now, after I teach you about the Haitian Revolution, I'd like you to look at these 6 stories, the stories of the United States, France, Italy, Peru, Mexico, and Brazil. Maybe one of these countries is more interesting to you than the others. So think ahead. Which of these revolution stories would you like to learn about, and which of your classmates would you like to work with? So you can think ahead for that. So hopefully you have the basics of Unit 3. Lots of interesting things from 1750 to 1900. I'm looking forward to teaching you. So thank you for watching.